Hockey Inside Out, presented to you by the Gazette.
We're back with another episode of Hockey Inside Out. Thrilled to be joined today again by Michael Farber and Dave Stubbs. The big news this week, of course, the new Sportsnet television deal. Have they offered you a job yet, Mike?
Not yet, but I'm open, I'm available. No, I'm very happy at TSN. I've been with them since 1993, but they are throwing a lot of money around. We've gone from $40 million a year, which is what TSN was paying the NHL, to $400 million.
It's crazy. It's absolutely insane. You must be, what, a restricted free agent, I'm guessing? Are you UFA yet with TSN or what?
You know what? I started with them. I did color with Vic Rauter on the Montreal Canadiens Stanley Cup Parade. Might have been the worst television in history, and yet they wanted me back. No accounting for taste.
How big a blow is this to TSN, though, Mike? It's got to be huge.
Oh, it is. People were very disappointed at the TSN studios on Tuesday. CFL, yes, they have the rights to CFL, and it's a big deal, especially in Western Canada, but my goodness, hockey and TSN, you know, it's bacon and eggs.
This might be an even bigger blow for RDS.
Yeah, absolutely. I sent a text message as soon as the news came out, very early, the morning that the news came out, to a good friend who's very, very well placed, very high up at RDS, and said, can you just get back to me, let me know? And he flipped me a quick text back saying, I'll get back to you. We're in meetings right now. As soon as we're out, I'll get back to you. And I've not yet heard from him. So they might have met through the night. But yeah, you talk about RDS and the hit that it's going to be for them. These guys live and breathe with the Montreal Canadiens. Their programming is 23 and a half hours a day, right, of the Habs. And the 60 games that people talk about going to RDS next year, not by any way, shape, or form
That's
guaranteed.
still to be negotiated.
I mean, that's right. TVA could wind up getting those games as well.
Did TSN see this coming, Mike?
Well, they knew they were in contract negotiations. We knew the package was up at the end of the 2013-14 season. They knew a deal had to get done. But I think late last week, TSN was reasonably confident they were going to retain hockey.
Now, of course, Hockey Night in Canada stays on CBC, but it's sort of a weird situation. Is Don Cherry going to come back?
Well, Scott Moore used to be head of CBC Sports, and now he is, I think, number 3 at Sportsnet. Scott once told me, I'm not going to be known as the guy who fires Don Cherry. Yeah. And so I can't imagine that now that will happen. I imagine Cherry stays as long as he wants to.
There's such a long history with Hockey Night in Canada. I mean, it's still going to be there on Saturday night, but it's
They don't even have editorial control of it anymore. I mean, TVA is going to have control over actually how Hockey Night in Canada will be produced. The name will be there, but
it's a Potemkin village. It's simply a facade. Yeah. And in a way
that's going to be a collector's item in 4 years or less. This was a freebie sent to me for something that some radio work that I did with Hockey Night in Canada Radio, and the logo on there is very distinctive. Look, you want to talk about what Hockey Night in Canada means, just remember the uproar that there was in this country over the theme song.
That's right.
I mean, I don't recall there ever being an uproar over the theme song for the Beachcombers or when the littlest hobo, right? I mean, had a second, had a rebirth.
Oh, that's wonderful.
No one was ever heckling the littlest hobo about the fact that suddenly his boxcar music went to him trotting down a street. I mean, Hockey Night in Canada is part of the fabric of this country.
TSN's keeping the rights to the song, though. They say they're not.
They bought it?
Yeah.
You own it.
Now, TVA, as much as it's a blow for TSN, this is huge for TVA. Does this mean that the likelihood of a team in Quebec City is stronger now?
I always thought there would be a team in Quebec City at some point, and Pelleteau is going about this the right way. Sotto voce, quietly, and I think that's important, unlike what we saw with Balsillie and Hamilton and what he was trying to do. You work with the NHL, and while Gary Bettman says, nothing in the short term, I'm sure Bettman knows what he's talking about there, but I think down the road, we'll have 2 more teams in the NHL, and we'll get rid of the unbalanced schedule. Things will work out. I'm sure Quebec City will be in that picture.
You ever bid on something on eBay and you win the thing, and you wake up the next morning and you say, God, I'm glad I won that, but what have I done? You wonder if there wasn't a little bit of that at TVA this morning, just when the reality of this, when the scope of this dawns on them and they understand how big a project this is. I mean, you're talking about hockey wall to wall. I mean, you're not painting anymore with a fine tip brush. You're using a roller in this country.
When you spend $400 million a year, it's like buying the Ferrari. You want to make sure you still have a little bit of money left for the gas and the insurance.
That's right, exactly, yeah.
I guess with Sportsnet now also, they're in a good situation where they can sort of pick and choose the talent they want to hire from CBC or TSN. It must be a nice situation to be in.
Well, there are also non-compete clauses, but I would guess TSN would allow people to make that move, especially the on-air commentators and the talent.
But there's so many different people who are involved in hockey production at TSN and RDS. You figure the people behind the scenes who really rely, their bread and butter is actually producing hockey. It's the people who are hauling the cables and manning the cameras and doing all this stuff. These are the people, you know, there are people who are doing that work already at TVA. So, I mean, you're talking about a whole lot of people now who suddenly are waking up this morning saying, I have no job security at all.
Are the NHL owners hugging and kissing Gary Bettman today?
Well, Gary Bettman has done a nice job, as usual. I mean, I know that's not a popular thing to say. And the argument you hear most often from people, or the statement you hear is, Bettman doesn't get it. He is the only person who gets it. He is the only person who has a view of the entire picture of what goes on in the game. The rest of us, we see parts of this. Yeah. He sees everything, whether you like him or not, he gets it.
And you get all the fans who are jumping up and down saying, all this guy's doing is trying to work for the owners. Well, of course, those are his bosses, right?
Now
his bosses are the owners of the clubs.
Each team's getting $14 million a year out of this. Is that enough to save franchises in Florida, Phoenix? How much of an impact is that?
Well, lousy franchises are lousy franchises. I mean, they're all McDonald's franchises, but some are on better corners than others. And I don't think that changes. You give teams a little bit of extra padding, but you're not going to turn it into a good franchise overnight. It's about management and how they manage the resources, not the resources
It's going to be
themselves.
a matter of what's going to happen to the salary cap with all this money that's pouring into the game now through this new TV deal. I mean, how is that going to impact the salary cap? How's it going to impact a lot of the different things? I mean, what's this going to do to the marketing, to the merchandising? How is TVA going to actually take what they have done and pour it into some of the promotion of the game and try to grow the game, as Bettman likes to talk about down in the States? Well, you know, it's all sort of the trickle down, right? I mean, it just keeps spilling over.
What makes it interesting for me from Rogers' perspective is they're very good at multiple platforms. And I think this is one of the areas that the NHL has done very well in compared to other major pro sports leagues that understand this.
We'll be back after a short break, and we'll discuss a little bit about Jeff Molson's investment and what he paid for the Canadiens. It sure looks like it was a pretty good deal right now. We'll be back. Welcome back. I'm sure Jeff Molson is smiling after this new television contract that was signed. When you look back, George Gillette paid $275 million for the Canadiens and the arena in 2001. Molson bought it for $575 million in 2009, and now Forbes has them listed at $775 million.
It's not going to be $1 billion franchise. I don't believe that's where the business is going. If you look at the Miami Dolphins, they're a $1.1 billion business because it's the NFL. I mean, maybe there will be one or two franchises, and I think the Canadiens will continue to grow, but it's been a good investment, but I don't see this growing to be $1 billion business in the near future.
George Gillette must be kicking himself, though, for selling the team for what he did.
You know, the Montreal Canadiens will never be confused for a used car. I mean, you buy a car, right, and it depreciates the second you pull it off the lot. The Canadiens were what? I think they were bought for $10,000 when they first joined the league in 1909. 114 years later, they've appreciated somewhat. Yeah. I mean, different dollars, of course, but yeah, George Gillette was a terrific owner, too. And a lot of people, I remember the fear and the angst when he bought this hockey club. A lot of people were thinking, here comes this rogue American in to buy our treasured Montreal Canadiens. This is a public trust, and Americans coming. What's he going to do to the team? All George was a good owner who hired who he thought were really good hockey people at the time, and he let them do their work.
Became Uncle George, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what he was. He was a friendly, folksy guy who sat down behind the glass, who hugged Youppi, who did all these wonderful things, and was really he was good for the hockey club. And if he hadn't gotten himself into Liverpool and into some of the other things that he was having to deal with at the end, I remember at Laval-sur-le-Lac Golf Club when the announcement was made that day that he was selling the hockey club, George was in tears, and they weren't crocodile tears at all. This was a guy who loved this hockey team. They were the favorite toy in his toy box.
Now, Saturday night we have the Leafs and Don Cherry in town. Is this still the best rivalry in hockey, Mike?
Not even close, and it hasn't been for years. The Western Conference owned the Toronto Maple Leafs for 17 years. They wandered in the desert. And this was a problem. It took away the rivalry. I talked to Sir Savard recently about that. I said, biggest rivals. He said, Quebec, Boston. Didn't even mention Toronto. Now, growing up in New Jersey, basically in the shadow of the Empire State Building, I had a table hockey set. There was the red team, Montreal, and the blue team. And the blue team wasn't the Rangers. It was the Toronto Maple Leafs. But that was then, this is now. They haven't played since '79, Dave, in
I
the
know,
playoffs.
it's crazy. They played, what, 15 times in the playoffs total? And when you look at that, it's ridiculous. I think it's 8-7 for the Canadiens in that. But yeah, the Bruins now are the rivalry for the Montreal Canadiens. The Leafs, it's starting to pick up a little now. There's a little bit of an edge to it. I mean, there's a little bit of anger that goes on, the Colton Orr, George Parros, and just some of the stuff that's happened in recent seasons. Certainly this year, the fact that the Leafs are playing better hockey doesn't hurt, because I mean, we always kind of got a little bit of a sick, twisted kick in Montreal about the fact that the Maple Leafs sucked. Well, I mean, now, I mean, they're not, right? I mean, they don't suck anymore. So it's interesting to see these guys playing better hockey, and it makes for a better NHL, and it certainly makes for a better situation when the Leafs come to town. It's ridiculous. I remember when the Canadiens retired the numbers of Yvan Cournoyer and Dickie Moore together, and for some reason, they chose to do this on a night that the Maple Leafs were in town. Well, the ceremony was drowned out by the Go Leafs Go who was up in the stands, who had been in town drinking themselves stupid for 2 days. Right?
There's still something so special about Saturday night to me with the Maple Leafs in town. Yeah. It's a special hockey night in Canada.
But you're of a certain age. You're of an age when this country had two teams, and you were either a hockey sweater, rock carrier, Canadiens guy, or you were a Connie Smythe Leafs guy, and that's the only choice you had, and that's been passed on through generations. I mean, I've been out west, and you have too, and you've seen the Canadiens and in these buildings, and there's still a huge support, even though Montreal hasn't always cultivated it, and again hasn't won a cup since '93.
The younger generation, of course, it's Ovechkin, Crosby, and we've seen both of them against the Canadiens. Who do you take if you have to pick one player to start your team, Ovechkin or Crosby?
Depends if I want to sell tickets or not necessarily. I would think that a guy like Ovechkin, certainly, I mean, he is so charismatic and he is just so out there. He scores goals in dramatic, sometimes totally sick, impossible ways, and throws himself into the glass. And a very, very exciting hockey player. But Sid, still, I think if you look at what he does, my biggest beef with Sid, and it's been this way since the day that he came into the game, is the fact that he just spends way too much time whining and complaining about his lot in life out there.
Oh, a little bit like Wayne Gretzky.
Yeah, it could be just a little bit,
well,
perhaps.
I think you're far too hard on Crosby. I love Crosby. He would be my guy, by far the more complete player. But you've always been mesmerized by the eye candy, Dave. I mean, Ovechkin is essentially eye candy. A fabulous player, scores goals like nobody's business, and I love him to death. But Crosby is the more complete player.
I won't argue that by any stretch. So Crosby absolutely is the more complete player. It was interesting the Saturday night last week listening to him after the game talking about Tomasz Plekanec being a little guy who's not afraid to lift a stick. Well, let's see, Plecky's the same height as Crosby. He's 4 pounds lighter, so maybe that's where the little came from. But clearly the Canadiens had Crosby off his game all night long, and Sid was the one who was doing all the trash talking. Plekanec just said, "I'm a good listener."
That was a great line. Now, you have a Russian connection in your life right now.
Yeah, my daughter is working as a journalist for the Moscow Times, the one English language newspaper in Russia, and actually she'll be doing some work as a researcher translator for NBC during the Sochi Olympics. So yeah, I'll be over there. It will be my last Olympics. You can write that down. I swear it'll be number 18.
That's what Juan Antonio Samaranch said about 9 Olympics before the end too.
Yeah, maybe you'll be covering it for Sportsnet. Now, did your daughter ever get a chance to meet Alex Ovechkin?
On her 18th birthday, the Caps were in Montreal. I brought her over to the Queen E, and that's where she sat and talked with Ovechkin. Actually, the first time I did a story on Ovechkin for Sports Illustrated, she wrote him a note in Russian with the help of some of her school friends. He liked the note, says, "Get her on the phone." It was a Friday night. We're on our way to dinner in New York City. And he called her, and after 90 seconds, her Russian was exhausted. His wasn't.
And she hangs up and says, "Sid Crosby's a more complete player."
Mike, it's always a pleasure having you here. I hope to have you back again soon. Dave, thanks. So we hope you enjoyed this episode of Hockey Inside Out, and we'll be back next week with another one.